Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's virtual education program at Cancer Support Community South Bay. I'm Rebecca, the program manager, and I welcome you to this workshop titled Diets and Cancer. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, CSC South Bay's mission is to uplift and strengthen people impacted by cancer by providing support, fostering compassionate communities, and breaking down barriers to care. Our vision is that everyone impacted by cancer receives the support they want and need throughout their experience. We serve the South Bay, Long Beach, and Orange County area all at no cost. Our program includes support groups, networking groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs like this workshop. Educational programs are open to all. If you'd like to hear more about our services or join our community, please visit our website at cscsouthbay.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, we ask you to keep your microphone muted to eliminate any distracting background noise. Please feel free to enter any general questions into the chat function found at the bottom of the Zoom window anytime. Without further ado, I introduce our workshop speaker. Lisa Statner, MS RDN CSO, works as an outpatient oncology dietitian at USC Norris Cancer Hospital. She has over 25 years experience helping survivors navigate the often confusing territory of nutrition before, during, and after cancer treatment. She's a frequent contributor to various media outlets, including Parade Online Magazine and USA Today. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm always so happy to be here. And you can hear me okay, correct?
Yes.
Yes, fabulous. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm so happy you're here. So my main thought for today was, I get so many questions about what is the best diet to prevent cancer. And in all honesty, there's not a diet that will cure cancer, but there's definitely a lot of things that we can do. And I thought really the best thing would be just to teach you a little bit of discernment because every day there's a new diet coming out. I don't know them all. Um, every day a patient will come to me and say, have you heard of, such and such diet? And I'll think, no, I have not. And, I can only spend so much time on social media and in the, reading the journals to discern all the diets. But I do think there's some key components that will help you in deciding for yourself. And I think that will be of the most benefit to you. So let's get going and feel free to ask questions as we're going along. I'm happy to stop and ask any of your questions. So, oh, this is very sensitive here. Okay, so this, I really like this.
Lisa, we can't see your screen.
Oh, you can't. Did you before?
Before I started the workshop, yes.
Yeah, I thought
I
you
can
could see
see
that.
it.
Right there, you can. Yes. And you can't see that slide?
Nope.
No. All right. Hang on one moment. Wonder if we do. Okay, good. And you can see this.
Yes, wonderful.
Okay, thanks. All right, so this was something that I pulled out of one of the journals, and I really liked it. And I think it's important because it really illustrates the key components of preventing cancer. And so the quote is, improvements in lifestyle behaviors to reduce cancer risk include a healthy diet, calorie restriction, and regular physical exercise. Honestly, guys, this is the bottom line. These key things here. Good diet, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Calorie restriction, no doubt about it, and physical activity. And so the research is solid on this. And I think these three things get overlooked a lot because we start looking at the nuances of diet. We start splitting hairs with this supplement or this ingredient in a food or this mushroom or this or that. And this is it, these three components, which are key. So we'll get into that. All right, so the most important thing to start really evaluating the diets that are out there is inflammation. That's the bottom line. So when we talk about diet, but even lifestyle in general, it's all about inflammation. And so we want to reduce inflammation and protect our bodies from inflammation. So, really, what is it? So, inflammation can be thought of in two ways. So, one way, and I think this is the best example, if you get a um, splinter in your finger and it gets a little red and puffy, that's inflammation, right? It's inflamed, it's your body's reaction to trauma. But all disease, so cancer, heart disease, um, Alzheimer's, autoimmune disease, any kind of disease really starts with inflammation at the cellular level. And that's what really we want to start looking at to reduce. So when we're looking at our diet, always think about, does this diet help reduce inflammation? All right, so let's start with reducing inflammation. So we're looking at the foods that are anti-inflammatory, right? So reduce inflammation, anti-inflammatory. So a couple of the diets that actually have been shown through research to help this is the Mediterranean diet. You know, honestly, the Mediterranean diet over and over and over again has been shown to reduce inflammation. And this is also a plant-based diet, or even if you've heard of the Blue Zone diets, which I include that in there because the Okinawan diet is a Blue Zone diet, and it's very similar to the Mediterranean diet, but a little bit of a taste preference there. Because not everybody prefers the Mediterranean diet, but honestly, the research is solid. And just a note about saying research is solid, the beauty of good research is that it's always changing every day. So there's no like solid, this is the end of the road science. And, just as a side note, I'll tell you, because I've been doing this for so long, back in the day, we used to tell people no egg yolks because they'll raise your cholesterol. That certainly has turned on its head, and we say, please eat egg yolks based on the science. So it's always changing. So, the things that I'm talking about now is just what we know to this day, but a lot of it is really common sense because, at the end of the day, the closest to nature, the better, with your food. And um, you can never go wrong with that. The other part of the anti-inflammatory diet or reducing inflammation would be to decrease the things that promote inflammation. So our ultra-processed foods, we'll get into that in a moment. Added sugar, we hear a lot about sugar, alcohol, and seed oils. And we'll discuss all those in a bit. So do we have any questions so far? No, I don't think I see any. So honestly, guys, just pipe in if you have a question. All right, so let's just kind of look at the Mediterranean diet, and I sort of encompass this with many of the plant-based diets. Um, and just to go back a little bit, most diets in general. So um, there's some basics, and a lot of it goes to preference. I've always believed that I don't care what the best diet in the world is, if you can't stand it, you should not be choking down food you don't like. Just to be frank, um, you should enjoy what you're eating. Food is a huge part of life, and stress also causes inflammation. So if you're eating a diet you don't enjoy and it's causing you stress, it's going to backfire on you. And will the Sorry, I'm just checking the questions. Yes, you can have the PowerPoint, no problem. Um, so anyway, so the Mediterranean diet, again, this is kind of a general diet, but the people in the Mediterranean or people that lived along the coast of the Mediterranean have very similar dietary practices, which fortunately is very similar to all of us living in Southern California. So the first one, though, is the extra virgin olive oil. And we've all heard about this forever. It's high in polyphenols, which are anti-inflammatory chemicals. There's also great vitamins, minerals, vitamin E as an example. Um, And uh, well, we'll get into the oils in a bit, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. The whole grains. Now, that's the only part of this diet where there's a little bit of a caveat because in this country, a lot of our grains are not grown like me- when many of us were children, and so they've been adulterated and a little bit different. A lot of us don't tolerate the grains. But definitely the legumes or the beans, the peas, nuts, seeds also have lots of polyphenols and these bioactive phytochemicals, which I'll get into in just a minute too. Vitamin E, super healthy fat, and the carotenoids are like the beta carotenes that you've heard about. Fruits and vegetables, it's very heavy. And you can see on this plate, which I think is a good example, which is really considered the modern American plate. Well, I would say the hopeful American plate. It doesn't always happen in practice, but really half of our plate should come from vegetables. And this is where all these powerful um, anti-cancer, anti-disease, anti-inflammatory chemicals are coming from. And the polyphenols, of course, too. The grains in the fruit. So think of this as sort of your carbohydrate section, a little bit smaller, and then also your protein. And I know there's a big push right now for loads of protein. And honestly, the jury's still out on this, but I have to say I see so much heaviness in the protein, and 1 gram per pound of body fat is almost ridiculously heavy in protein. If you have any degree of kidney disease, it's not really a great idea just to add a ton of protein to your diet. But definitely we need it. And as we get older, so older means age of 40 or older, you need a little bit more than usual to maintain muscle integrity. But you can see with this plate some of the examples of the foods that you want to include there. Fish and seafood, also a big part of the Mediterranean diet. And I know not everyone likes seafood. And if you're doing vegetarian or vegan, you're not eating seafood. A big part of the seafood are the omega fats, the omega fatty acids. Um, and you want that balance if the EPAs and DHAs, and which is naturally, so those are examples of omega-3 fatty acids, and those are already in your seafood. But if you don't like seafood or if you're not eating it, definitely the the supplements that you can take that come from seaweed. And same thing as the fish oil supplements. And so that's where the Okinawan diet is a little bit different than the so called Mediterranean diet because instead of the olive oil, they kind of swap out for the seaweed. And very similar diet and kind of covers both taste preferences. The other thing is the dairy. And dairy has gotten a really bad rap in the last few years, maybe in the last 10 years. And I have to tell you guys, in all honesty, um, I'm just going to tell you a personal story of what I learned about dairy in the last few years. And it's based on the research. And so, for so long, well, in this country, dairy has been a huge part of our lives. Dairy on cereal, drinking glasses of milk with meals. I hated milk my whole life as a kid. Love ice cream, don't get me wrong. I will go to town on ice cream. Hated milk. So when I was asked to do a review at USC of dairy milk versus nut milks, I thought, this will be easy. I thought, I don't really have a bias going in. I hate milk. I don't really drink nut milk. It's like neither has an attraction for me. And I really dove into the research. I was shocked. And so what I found was that dairy milk, so meaning cow's milk, and you could really likely put goat's milk into this as well, has anti-inflammatory properties, even a benefit or a risk reduction for breast cancer and colon cancer. And if there's not a risk reduction, it's just neutral, neither good, no, nor bad. So that's really what the research was showing. And I was pretty shocked. And of course, the nut milks don't have a lot in them unless they're fortified. A lot of them have some bad things in there. Carrageenan, as an example, which is inflammatory and related to certain cancers. A lot of the gums, a lot of the fillers doesn't have the protein which we need, or the calcium, or the D, unless it's all fortified. So I guess what I would say on that, don't be afraid of dairy. Where a lot of the studies in the past came from. So, if you're looking at Eastern and Western medicine, Eastern medicine has always said no dairy because it's inflammatory. But the studies that showed that, most of them came from Asian countries where that population doesn't tolerate dairy. They don't have the enzymes to break it down, which is just natural for them. So of course, yes, it's inflammatory. So if you don't tolerate a food, you're allergic to a food, you just know in your heart you don't feel good if you eat something, yes, it's going to be inflammatory to you. So stay away. So I'm not saying everybody on the planet should be eating or drinking cow's milk, but what I'm saying is don't be afraid of it because it can definitely have some benefit, good quality, meaning like the organic, not with the antibiotics and the hormones and all that garbage that a lot of our dairy milk has now, which is why so many people um, in the US that feel like they don't tolerate dairy and they go for a nice vacation in Europe and they knock themselves out with all kinds of dairy and they're just fine because those cows are bred differently, they're eating different foods. So it's a little bit of a different situation. So I'll just leave it at that so I can move on here. All right. So why are we focusing on plants? So everything is about plant-based diet, vegetarian, vegan, etc. And there's a difference in the three diets that I just mentioned. And one is plant-based or plant-focused, which is kind of the new little buzzword. Vegetarian, which can encompass a lot of different diets. So vegetarians will have different spins on that. They might be pescatarian, meaning mostly vegetarian, but they add some seafood in there. You could be lacto-ovo vegetarian, meaning mostly vegetarian, but then you do add in some eggs and some dairy. So there's so many versions of vegetarian diet, and then vegan, which is no plant food or no animal-based foods at all. And so with vegan, sometimes because I've had many vegans tell me, yeah, I just had some French fries for lunch. And is that healthy? Not necessarily, but so it doesn't mean that any of those diets necessarily are healthy. Um, but you want to look at the components. Are there a lot of processed foods in that diet? Which sometimes a vegan diet is heavy in the processed food. So it's a lot of work, to be honest, to be vegan. Vegetarian too, same thing. Are you really adding real plants in there? You might be eliminating a lot of animal products, but are you adding in the plants? And then what we call just a regular diet, basically meaning you're open to anything in moderation and all kinds of things. So, but the plant-based diet or plant-focused diet, back to that plate that I showed you, half of everything that you're eating should be coming from plants. And what do I mean by plants? Not just vegetables, um, vegetables, fruits, um, seeds, nuts, legumes. So those would all be in the plant category. All right. So probably the most exciting thing about the plant foods, and this is something I've been following since I was a young dietitian back in the Wild West, um, are uh, the phytochemicals. And basically, this just means plant chemicals, phyto meaning plant, and then chemicals. And it's interesting because, when we classify what something is a nutrient, um, these are just vitamins and minerals. So, vitamins and minerals, really all we know about them to date. and we're learning more based on some good research, is how much do we need to prevent disease? So a good example would be something like vitamin C. We know at least 60 milligrams a day of vitamin C, which is easy to eat, will prevent a disease called scurvy. We rarely see scurvy in this country. And just kind of a fun fact, back probably, I think in the 1800s, when a lot of people traveled by ship only, a lot of people coming from England um, always brought limes with them on the boats. And it was noticed that these people never developed scurvy, a deficiency of vitamin C, because they were always eating these limes, which is packed in vitamin C, which is why, no offense to the English people here, why the people from England are called limeys. So I don't know if any of you have ever heard that story, but I think it's kind of cute. So anyway, um, so with the phytochemicals, so that's what's classified as nutrients, your vitamins and minerals. Now, the phytochemicals, no one really knows how much we really need to reverse disease, to prevent disease, but we know that they're super powerful. And if you're ever interested in perusing scientific journals, the pharmaceutical journals are fascinating because they're always studying these things. And I just put a few examples of some of these phytochemicals, which probably a lot of you have already heard of. So they've been used a lot, just in the popular vernacular. So sulforaphane, really powerful, especially in broccoli. Broccoli was one of the first of the cruciferous groups or the cabbage family that was studied, and really shown to have very powerful anti-cancer properties. You may have heard of the supplement called DIMS, DIMS, which is really from broccoli, or sulforaphane, which has been shown to help block the bad estrogen. So it'll block the receptors of the bad estrogen. So very now we know that we don't need the alcohol component, but the resveratrol in a lot of the red and the purple fruits and vegetables is um, very powerful, not only in helping reduce cancer risk, but also all the other diseases, and especially heart disease. And like I mentioned, if you're reducing your risk, reducing inflammation for one disease, you're doing it for all the rest. Lycopene, another one of the first by as well as sulforaphane. And so this was noticed first in cooked tomatoes, and it seemed to reduce risk for prostate cancer. And so um, what's interesting with the lycopene, like with all of our plant foods, there's a certain synergistic effect. So when a lot of these plants are together, it might help with absorption and also the effectiveness. And so lycopene, when cooked with olive oil in in a cast iron skillet, you'll really absorb so much more of the benefits of the lycopene. And again, and a lot of the red, the orange, the pink fruits and vegetables. The I can never pronounce it, so I'm just going to say the acronym EGCG. Super powerful in green tea, especially. Also available in some of the other, avocado. I'm a big avocado pusher. The pistachios, strawberries. Um, um, Weight loss benefits, also very powerful anti-cancer benefits, especially with the hormone-dependent cancers. Now, what's the dose you need of green tea? It's a lot. So if you're not a green tea fan, you need 4 cups a day is what the research is showing. However, um, one serving of matcha is equivalent to 4 cups of green tea. So that can cut down on that. And personally, I love green tea as a iced tea. So you can get a lot more there in that form. Curcumin or turmeric, uh, very powerful spice. So a lot of our spices, we're learning so much more about those and anti-inflammatory benefits. Turmeric is interesting. I was just talking to a doctor earlier today about this, that I kind of feel like it's the Lipitor of the old days. And if any of you remember, 20 years ago, it was found that Lipitor interfere or grapefruit juice interfered with the effectiveness of Lipitor. And now there's all kinds of drugs that seem to interact. Well, we're seeing more and more with the turmeric. So make sure you look up if you're on any medications with the turmeric, if you're taking it in a supplement dose. So meaning like 1,000 milligrams or more in a supplement, just as a spice, you're fine. But we are definitely finding that some of the anticoagulant drugs, some of the um, glucose lowering medications, possibly could the turmeric could interfere with, and even a few of the chemotherapy drugs. So you just want to double check on that. And but it's a very powerful anti-inflammatory. It's even used topically in many countries. It's first really noticed the benefits. Some researchers started noticing that in India there was virtually no Alzheimer's, and they wanted to do a deep dive into that and found that it seemed to be the turmeric. And so turmeric, has been studied in laboratories and on people, and really is a powerful anti-inflammatory. Um, uh, in some countries, they mix it with egg yolk and use it topically, like for sprains and cuts and bruises and that kind of thing. So, if you can take it, it's great. You always want to make sure there's some black pepper or pepperine mixed with it. That will enhance the absorption by about tenfold. Anthocyanins, again, one of the original phytochemicals discovered, especially in the dark purples and the blues, um, and also has very powerful anti-cancer benefits. So when you hear about blueberries being so powerful, that's where that's coming from. And again, another side note, I'd like to say too, is that the phytochemicals that I highlighted here are ones that have been known for a long time. They've been studied a lot, um, but there's a lot of phytochemicals that have not been discovered yet. And so for me, variety is really key. You don't want to cut something out. So sometimes, people, and, rightly so, are doing the right things, and they might say, I'm having my, oatmeal with blueberries in the morning, my kale salad, which is in the cruciferous group, by the way, kale and arugula, believe it or not, and still in the broccoli family. Having my kale salad for dinner, then I have my asparagus and salmon for dinner, and that's all they eat. But you want to expand your horizons and have a lot of variety and pair things differently because of that absorption factor. And sometimes plant foods too will block some of the chemicals that you don't want a lot of. So nature really has it figured out, to be honest. So a lot of variety is really key. And then I just added some of the other phytochemicals. Again, I can't pronounce half of these things, but the couple that I'll mention, the genistein from soy. Do not be afraid of soy, even if you've had breast cancer. So the history on that, and if you want some of the research and the studies or articles on this, I'm happy to tell you. And again, fortunately I've been watching this research for 30 years. So we used to push soy like nobody's business because it first was really noticed to lower cholesterol levels, and then it was noticed to reduce cancer risk. And then all of a sudden, a couple rat studies came out that it looked like this soy was increasing breast tumor growth in rats. And so then soy was off the table completely. And then some other researcher said, hey, wait, but look, a lot of these countries, especially the Asian countries where people eat soy every single day, they still have lower breast cancer rates. So what do we tell people? And so then the narrative was changed a bit. And so then we said, okay, so if you've always been eating soy, it looks like it's safe for you because your body's used to it. And now with more research that's out there, um, what where it is now is that the estrogen receptors are different in a human body, as compared to the phytochemicals or the plant estrogens. And so it's like comparing apples and broccoli, honestly. And so the human body, um, uh, uh, the receptors in the human body doesn't take those plant estrogens, basically. So it's a little bit different. So it does seem to be very safe, for humans. And like I said, I'm happy to send out, all the estrogen. And again, this is what we know today. Um, let's see what else. Oh, gingerol, ginger, another very powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory spice. One that's not on here, which is off the charts, even higher properties than curcumin or turmeric, is clove, and that's a spice we don't use a lot in this country except around Christmas time because nobody knows what to do with it. But if you have any friends from India, they do know what to do with it. They do use it a lot in their cooking. Golden milk is a really popular drink that encompasses a lot of these healthy spices. So look into that. Um, but uh, a lot of our spices are very powerful. And let's see, what time is it? Keep going on. All right. So another important property of our plant foods is the fiber. And this really gets into gut health at this point. About 20 years ago, scientists started calling the gut the second brain. And I'll never forget the first time I was at a conference and I was heard that. And I thought, that's so weird because the brain is the most powerful organ in my mind. But our gut is very, very powerful. There's a lot of hormones, enzymatic action, chemical action that's going on. Kind of a fun fact is that serotonin, which is one of our feel good hormones, 90% of it is manufactured in our gut. It crosses the blood brain barrier from our gut and gets to your brain. And so that's just one example that's very well known. So there's just a lot of activity going on in our gut. So how do we have a healthy gut? And a healthy gut is also really, really the driver of anti-inflammation in your body. So you can't negate your gut health. And again, studies are solid on this topic as far as preventing a lot of cancers, especially breast cancer. You want a healthy gut. So, um, fiber is one of those key factors. You hear a lot about prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, all this stuff. These also encompass a healthy gut because there's a lot of bacteria going on. And if you think of so you have about 30 feet of gut. That's a lot, starting from your mouth all the way down. But you have a lot of what are called villi in your gut. So these are like little hairs that are sort of moving around. And a main function there is that they prevent the bad bacteria from getting in to your body. So this really helps prevent inflammation, help prevent disease, right? Because if you don't have a lot of activity going on by eating a lot of fiber, because the fiber helps kind of keep the action going, you're just going to have dead villi. They're just sitting there doing nothing. And they're like this. And now the bacteria can get in. And that's called bacterial translocation. And so that bacteria, passes in through the tissue, gets into your bloodstream, and you've got a whole lot of mess there. So you want to keep things moving, a lot of activity in your gut. And you have a lot of bacteria too that has a lot of action in there. You have good bacteria, bad bacteria, you need both, essentially. But when it comes to fiber, there's two types of fiber. Well, first thing I'm going to backtrack. First thing I'm going to mention is the 25 to 35 grams a day recommended. So this gets into what a lot of the healthcare institutes recommend. This is where all of our recommendations tend to come from. So you've got the Heart Association, the Diabetes Association, the Heart Lung Association, the Cancer Society. It goes on and on and on, with the health nonprofit healthcare institutes. And they do their own research or they look at other research and they say, hey, we think this is the best amount of sugar to have in a day, how much fiber to have in a day, how much fat to have in a day, et cetera, et cetera. So it's again kind of that changing, evolving science situation. There's no consensus on fiber. Nobody says the same thing. Really, if you look at what everyone's saying, it's about 25 to 35 grams a day. That's a lot. And honestly, it's hard to achieve that. It does take a lot of work. So if you look at your food labels, um, everybody thinks that like salads are high in fiber. They're not. Like lettuce has about 2 grams of fiber in a cup, just to give you a frame of reference. Your cereals actually, which are not always the healthiest foods, tend to have more. Like a cup of certain cereals might have like 7 grams of fiber. But there are two types of fiber, and you need both, and they work synergistically. So you have the soluble fiber and the insoluble. Soluble fiber, this dissolves in water. So, good examples of that, especially, is like oatmeal. And these are a lot of the fibers, if you think of as being heart healthy, can help take cholesterol out of the body, can also take some of those other toxins out of the body. And other examples, the chia seeds, legumes, beans, apples are fantastic, and berries. And if you think of the fibers that sort of become like gelatinous, that's kind of a good example of soluble. The insoluble fibers, think of string on celery, the stuff that just is not going anywhere. No matter how long it's in your system, it's the way it goes in, it's the way it's going to go out. And that's also super important, right? So it doesn't dissolve in water, um, helps with regularity, helps take toxins out of the system a little bit quicker. And again, some of the food sources that I listed there, but I always like to think of celery as a good example there. But really, you need both. And what is this also? Your prebiotics, right? So people are spending a lot of money on prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics. Frankly, I have no idea what postbiotics are supposed to be. I think it's a marketing thing. But prebiotics are just your plant fibers. So you don't need to take that supplement. Your or yeah, the prebiotics. So the probiotics, those are your fermented foods. And those, not all from plants, but some are plants. And those also add to your gut microbiota. Those good bacteria helping stop the bad bacteria from, sneaking in through your villi. Um, and there's not a lot of those fermented foods. And so, really, that would be your yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, uh, kombucha, uh, uh, kimchi, natto or natto kinase, and miso. And that's pretty much it. So I know I always run through those and people just look at me like, you've got to be kidding me. Those are all disgusting foods. But find something that you like and a way to eat it. And that right there is your probiotic. So you don't need to take a supplement there. And if you hate all those foods, then maybe so. All right. So, all right. Just a few little tidbits about fiber and cancer. So, again, like I said, fiber will enhance your gut microbiome, and that in itself decreases inflammation. So, we're always going back to how can I decrease inflammation? So, high fiber diet has a protective effect from breast cancer, actually, and premon menopausal and postmenopausal. So that was some recent research which was really good news because it was thought originally that it was just the premenopausal women, but also for the rest of us ladies. So and also there's a strong association with a high fiber diet and a lower risk of colorectal cancer. Full disclosure, we are seeing colorectal cancers off the chart, especially in our young people. Um, it's not really definitive on why, Likely diet has a big part of that. If you look at the American diet, standard American diet, the SAD diet, it's really devoid of a lot of fiber. And then also fiber might reduce caloric intake, which also helps reduce your risk for cancer. All right, the second part of inflammation. So we talked a lot about what can you do to add to your diet? What are the positive things to reduce inflammation? Let's look at the things maybe to start looking at cutting out a little bit. Um, I don't, sometimes people say, oh, you're a food Nazi, you're a dietitian, whatnot. No, I think, a lot of it is choice, with the way that you eat. You have to really look at number one, what's your budget? What can your budget tolerate? What's happening in your family? Because, now we have so many families living together that are um, different ages, multicultural, so many factors. And we really, to me, I think it's almost more important to sit down at least once a week with a family dinner and have that experience than nitpick about having the perfect diet because I think that too much stress around meals actually is um, counterproductive. Stress is the number one cause of inflammation. And so, if it's a choice between stress in the family or the perfect diet, get rid of that stress. So, let's look at some of the food things though that we can um, limit a little bit. And honestly, it's a process to change your diet. Very few people change their diets overnight. If there's any accountants or engineers in the group here, you're my favorite people. But the rest of us mortals, it takes time. It takes time to transition your diet from, maybe one that's all fast food to one that's a little bit healthier. And then just finding that right balance for, your lifestyle. Sugar is another question I get all the time, almost every day. And the assumption is that sugar causes cancer. It does not cause cancer. However, it's a pro-inflammatory. So it's kind of like if you've got that little spark or fire brewing and you start fanning the flames, that's sugar, fanning the flames and it causes a lot of problems in a lot of ways. And so if you get the handout, you can read this. I actually cut it down a little bit um, because there's so much to say about sugar. There's so many issues with it. So the first thing I will say, so sugar is sort of a catch-all phrase. It's like saying I drive a car. It doesn't tell you the specifics, right? So the same with sugar. There's a lot of different types of sugar. Um, You could even say that carbohydrate is sugar, which is it is in a sense. But let's talk about the sweet stuff that we all know as sugar. So, um, back I believe in the 40s, there's something called the Warburg effect, and what was discovered back then was that under a PET scan, you had a healthy cell and you had a cancer cell, and you had to inject them with sugar in order to light them up and see what's happening. And what was noticed was that the cancer cells utilize the sugar much quicker than the normal cells, and they were actually able to convert it and utilize the oxygen from that. Typically, cancer cells hate oxygen, and so it was kind of a really interesting phenomenon, and it looked like sugar caused the cancer cells to grow bigger and faster. Which, yes, that's correct. But does sugar start the cancer? So no, no one has been shown that it starts it, except it does fan the flame, as I mentioned, promotes inflammation. So, when you talk about starving a cancer cell, that's a little bit of another topic, getting into fasting mimicking, um, intermittent fasting, that kind of thing, keto diets, which there's fantastic research in that whole arena. And I'm not really getting into that today because that's a huge topic, but definitely some benefits with all of that, and especially going through treatment, fasting, keto, sort of ridding the cancer cells and not competing the cancer cells with glucose and chemotherapy. So definitely some benefit there. Um, the other issue with sugar that's in my book almost more profound and is the long story to inflammation. And that is that if you look at sugar, so again, the sweet stuff, so just think of white sugar, it's really two chemicals. So it's glucose and fructose put together. And um, the glucose part, that's the body's primary source of fuel. So as I was talking about the Warburg effect, that was really glucose that they were looking at. So the main the gas for the car, if you will. And so when you split those two chemicals together, they have different pathways into the body. And we always think of fructose as being the healthy sugar. And I know I certainly did as a young dietitian. I used to go to the health food store and actually buy pounds of fructose. It was much heavier than, the C&H cane sugar, which is hilarious now when I think about it. Excuse me. So, but the fructose part of it is metabolized very similar to alcohol. And when we get too much of it in our system, it'll raise triglyceride levels. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people skinny as a rake and everything seems okay in their diet and they have super high triglyceride levels. They're not eating a lot of fat. And I always ask them, how much candy do you eat? And they're always shocked. Like, do you have a camera in my house? And they might have like one of those big tubs of licorice or jelly beans and they're popping it all day long. So they're getting a lot of uh, sucrose or glucose and fructose at one time, more than their body can handle. And that's always a telltale sign. So, runners, marathon runners, knock yourself out, eating the glucose things and, whatnot to keep you going. That's different. You're utilizing that sugar. But someone that's sitting at a desk is not, right? And so now they have these really high levels of fructose in their body. They're um and where does it go? So it's like I said, it's metabolized very similar to alcohol and ends up in the liver because the body wastes nothing. Our bodies are amazing and we don't waste a thing. So if there's glucose or energy in the system, we take care of it, even if we're not running marathons. So now all this fructose gets converted into glycogen. Now it's sitting in the liver. And a really interesting phenomenon, well, maybe not a phenomenon, but just something I've observed over the years is that many cancer survivors, when they first start treatment, the doctors, doing all the tests, the blood tests and the scans and, whatnot. And they say, oh, by the way, you have something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Don't worry about it for right now. I've seen this 100 times. And the patient's like, oh, what's that? Estimates are 40 to 60% of the US population has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's because of all that fructose that gets stored in the liver. Now, easy enough to reverse by changing the diet, reducing sugar. But if it is goes on too long untreated, it can become cirrhotic or cirrhosis, which is not so easy to reverse. So um, just kind of an interesting fact, on sugar. And when all this started, really was probably back in the 90s when there was the fat scare. So if anyone in the audience is in my generation, you'll remember Snackwells came out and all these, zero fat or super low fat foods. And we all thought, great, I can eat the whole box of the um, what were they called? Like the little chocolate devil cakes, the snack wells. You could eat a whole a whole tray of them and be fine because there's no fat. But what happened was the food companies dumped all the sugar in there, and now now we know carbohydrates or sugar is what makes you fat, not fat. So that's kind of the right Reader's Digest version, a little bit about sugar. And you really want to try and reduce that as best you can because, liver preservation is really key. That's where all of your drugs, all the toxins in our environment, everything, amongst other organs really gets ciphered through there. How much sugar do we need? So again, going back to some of the healthcare institutes that I mentioned, I like, I think the strictest is the American Heart Association, the one in the middle. We've got the FDA, although hopefully they'll be changing this soon, and we have the World Health Organization, which the percentage means nothing to anyone, right? Less than 10% of your daily calorie intake. No one knows how much they're eating in a day. So um, the 10% is not really valuable, but I like solid numbers. So the Heart Association came up with so we'll just look at adult women and men, less than 25 grams for women, less than 36 grams for men. And this is really based on weight. And then the less than 25% for adolescents, which probably should be um, less than that. What does that look like in real life? Um, so we have some good numbers, and researchers still debate on this. So this is not like a definitive number. I think you can go much lower. So I love this example. So this is a 16-ounce Coca-Cola, not a diet. And you can see 200 calories, which, that's a snack of some sort. What you want to look at on your label, and I hated these labels when they came out. I don't mind saying it because I think there were some things that were good about them and other things too confusing. The percent daily value means nothing to most people, and it's based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So if you know you're maintaining a good weight on a 2,000 calorie diet, sure, it might be valuable for you. But the rest of us have no clue how many calories we're eating today. And most women, 2,000 calories is way too much. That's a lot. So, if you're, 5'3" to 5'6", you should be eating maybe 12 to 17 hundred calories, maybe. But anyway, so what you want to look at is the bottom line. And you can see the grams, the milligrams. But the first thing you want to look at is the serving size. So in this case, the serving size is straightforward. Sometimes a product like this might say serving size a half a bottle. So you want to watch for that because most people would consume the whole thing, right? And so then you would really be getting 400 calories, not 200. So be really cognizant of the serving size. Then, when you're looking at the sugars, you want to look at the very last thing there where it says added sugars because those are those sugars they dump in. Some of the sugars are naturally there. So let's say this was maybe a milk product. So total sugars might be high because of the lactose, which is a type of sugar. But you really want to look at those added sugars because that's where you're going to get that cane syrup, the high fructose corn syrup, all those added sugars that they dump in for flavor. So this in particular has 55 grams. So I just showed you, the range, 25 to 35 grams in a day. This one item has 55. So you can get a good idea how much sugar we're getting in our diet. It's really off the charts. It's too much. And so how much really should you be getting a day? And like I said, a lot of the research debate on this. So some say zero added sugars, period, which I think is extraordinarily hard to do and not realistic, but a nice goal if you can do it. Other researchers say, well, try and keep it to no more than 2 to 4 grams per serving, a lot more doable. Other researchers say, well, maybe during the week, keep it as close to zero, on the weekend splurge. So it's really, again, goes back to your diet preference, what's good for you and your family. Any amount of lowering that is going to be beneficial. And I don't know if any of you remember that movie Super Size Me, where the gentleman ate nothing but McDonald's for 3 months and he wanted to see what that would do to his body. So he had all the tests done beforehand and then after. One of the conditions he had, besides high triglycerides, was a non-alcoholic fatty liver. And again, that could be reversed. Unfortunately, that gentleman did die of cancer, and I believe it was colon cancer. Somebody in the group might correct me on that one. Okay. Oh, do we have? Yeah, I'm just checking our chat group. Um, y- yes. Yeah, grams of sugar. That's correct. Um, all right. Ah, okay. All right. So I mentioned that I would talk about this. So Um, so for the processed foods, again, another thing, I'm going to speed up a little bit because I know we're running out of time. But for the processed foods, it's kind of interesting. The UN, of all places, which is kind of interesting to me, came up with this new classification of processed foods. So it was actually the Agriculture Environmental Group of the UN that came up with it. And they came up with the NOVA classification system. It's not perfect like all these things, and, you probably have gathered by now I have criticism on all this stuff. I can't help myself, but anyway, it's not perfect, and you'll see why. But at least it sort of helps us, I think, look at really what processing is and the things to avoid. So group one, this is just minimally processed, and I'm going to use the example of a potato. Once you cut a potato, I think someone's microphone is on, by the way. Once you cut a potato, you've started processing it. Not good or bad, right? You just that's the reality, right? You're starting to process. So that's group one. Group two, these are the things that really you use mainly for cooking, for flavor. This is the part where it kind of I feel is confusing for people, because again, a lot of these things are actually healthy. So the olive oil is a great example. It is processed, but it's used more for cooking. Same with butter, honey, coconut oil, that sort of thing. So that's sort of like the culinary, as it says here, ingredients. Now we get into group three. So now we're talking about a little bit more process, which most of us grew up with this category of food. So you've got the potato, and now you've mashed it. Not necessarily bad, but you've processed it a little bit more, right? By mashing it, adding, some butter or whatnot to it. Bread, again, is another example that I think is really good. Group four, this is now the new classification, which is called the ultra processed foods. And so now, let's say you've taken that potato, right? You've started the processing, you've made it in mashed potatoes, and now you uh, put it in a mold of some sort, made it look like a potato chip and deep fried it, and now you've got a Pringles potato chip. That's ultra processing. So you've sort of taken it to the next level. You've taken the skin off, you've taken all the nutrients out. You've also added a lot of fats to it, salts to it, and in the deep frying, um, now you've developed acrylamides, which are cancer causing. That's a big reason why we say avoid the fried foods. It's not really necessarily for the heart health reason, it's because of those acrylamides, which are known carcinogens. So there's a lot of known carcinogens in our everyday life, which are still legal. It's always shocking to me why bacon and a lot of the processed salamis are still on the market with the nitrates, because we know those cause cancer. So but anyway, that's what we're looking at with processed foods. The seed oils, touch on this slightly. Again, pro-inflammatory. That's why you hear such a buzz about it these days. Two issues: high and low smoke point. So if you have an oil that starts burning at a low temperature, olive oil, unfortunately, is one of those oils. Um, that starts creating carcinogens. We don't want our oil to burn. And so that's the problem with barbecuing. Our fats and our oils are burning, and those create carcinogens. We want oils, if we're cooking at high heat, um, that don't burn. And so, really good ones would be avocado oil, coconut oil. Those are my two favorite. Tallow is another one. You hear a lot about tallow these days. Um, and keeping the coconut oil or the olive oil more for salads, drizzling on vegetables, low temperature stir frying, that kind of thing. And so, so those are the two issues. A lot of the so-called, and I hate the term seed oil because avocado, coconut, those are seeds, right? So it's kind of a misnomer. But think of just like the general vegetable blends that we've been using our whole life. Um, Pro-inflammatory and lower smoke point. So we want to avoid both of those. And they're super cheap, so they've been used in a lot of our ultra processed foods. Um, so weight, I mentioned that. Also, foods are high in calorie, high in carbohydrate. They're going to promote weight. Body fat creates inflammation. Body fat also creates high insulin levels in the body. Doesn't matter if you're diabetic or not. That creates inflammation. So staying at a healthy weight as best you can with all this junk food in our world, it's a challenge. But that's what you're looking at. I always leave. This is sort of a semi quote. And I had a client many years ago who became a dear friend. He lost 350 pounds, all on his own, no medicine, no surgery. And the first day that we met, he said he felt like he was standing at the bottom of Mount Everest looking up. And I said, yeah, you're right. So, you know, um, don't feel like it's a defeat to lose weight. We're all in the same boat. I battle it too. We all do. However, 5% decrease in your current weight, that's not a lot of weight, can really maximize your risk reduction. So, a few pounds makes a huge difference. Don't feel like you have to lose a huge amount of weight. It's really all about quality of life also too. So, but reducing inflammation, that body fat promotes inflammation just as much as the seed oils and the ultra processed foods. So we really want to get that lower. BMI, it's not the best tool, and that's what we all use in healthcare because that's what we have and it's easy. But there's a lot of factors going into weight, and I always feel like your healthy weight. You know your body better than any dietitian, any doctor. You know where you should be. And really do some soul searching, as far as where you could be. But a small amount, you're going to have leaps and bounds better health, cancer prevention, heart disease prevention, all of it. And just have more energy and feel like exercising more. Now, after all of that I said, what is the best diet to prevent cancer? And there's so many. And there's some of these other, like the Gerson diets, or some of these other, offshoot diets, and a lot of stuff that you read online. But I really wanted to give you the tools to focus on what you want to look for. So we talked about plant-based. We talked about reducing the seed oils. We talked about fiber. A lot of these components, do those diets have that? And really evaluate that. And again, what's the best diet for you? The one that you'll eat, right? So, so if you're eating something you don't like, it won't last more than a week, if that. So again, as I mentioned before, you want to have the best diet for your lifestyle and your health, but at least hopefully that gives you a few things to help you discern a little bit better, because there's going to be a new diet tomorrow out. Um, and they regurgitate the old diets too. It was so funny. One of my colleagues just reviewed the watermelon diet, and I remember learning about that when I was in college, and it was so ridiculous. And now they kind of came back with it. So, all these diets have new names, um, but basically, good quality protein, plant-based, delicious, affordable, and you'll be good. And yeah. So I think that was it. I think I won. Ah, yes. I love this quote, as corny as it is, but it is true. Food is one of our best medicines, along with exercise and good sleep and stress reduction, all those things will reduce your inflammation, and that's really where it's at. All right. Do we have, I think we have some questions, perhaps. Sorry, I ran on a little bit long. I'm sorry about
No,
that.
you were on a roll, Lisa. That was so much information in such a short period of time. Thank you so much. Are you able to stay on a few minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if there are any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat or unmute yourself and I can call on you. Um, Wonderful. And thank you again for sharing the slides with us, and I'll send them out as a PDF whenever you can get that chance.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I always appreciate we had a nice group here. And
Yes,
I didn't get to see all the names, so if some of my friends were on, hello, and thank you for joining because I know I have a few people that like to jump on. So
wonderful. I think you covered it all. You went into such great detail. I don't see any questions. So thank you again so much, Lisa, for your time and all the effort and research into looking at all of these details. Thank you so much again.
of course,